Debbie, I thought of you last week because I was on the Peloton and I was doing a 90s rock ride, and it was a great soundtrack. And then Higher by Creed came on, and I was like thinking back to when I was a kid, and I was like, oh, Creed. And I would like change the station. And then I had to sit through it because it's a Peloton ride. Like, you can't skip it. And I'm like, this is kind of a banger. I don't think I've ever listened to Higher all the way through. It's like, it's kind of a good song.
That's funny.
Were you into Christian rock growing up? Was that like a thing in your house?
I mean, Christian music was the only thing we were allowed to listen to, but I was not into it. I would secretly
Fair.
have my New Kids on the Block tape going, and I would like pause it, start stop button the minute my mom would walk up, or
Rebel.
Vanilla Ice. That was it. Vanilla Ice. We would listen to country music, but I remember Whose Bed Have Your Boots Been Under came on, and my mom was like, oh, we have to turn it. So yes, that is certainly a big part of my childhood. Traditional etiquette says that politics, religion, and money should never be brought up in polite company. And we're here to discuss all three. I'm Debbie Hancock, a conservative and a Christian living in the Deep South.
I'm Arielle Gorin, a born and raised New Yorker and a liberal Jew. We're asking the hard questions and actually listening to what the other has to say. Is Anybody Listening podcast starts now.
All right. Well, we're going to dive right in. This was, of course, not on our long-planned agenda a few weeks ago, but the government shutdown, and what kind of political podcast would we be if we didn't cover it? Yeah. For those of you who have been living in blissful ignorance, the federal government did shut down on October 1st after the House and the Senate failed to agree on a spending package. And you might be wondering, how is this possible? Republicans control the House and the Senate and the White House, but Republicans only hold 53 seats in the Senate. And so they do not have a filibuster-proof majority to even place a bill on the floor for a vote. So they need 8 Democrats' support to even move forward on voting on a spending package. 3 Democrats have already joined Republicans, but they still need 5 more Democrats to join them. So the main point of contention, I think you'll agree with this, Arielle, is the healthcare subsidies for people who purchase health insurance on the Affordable Care Act marketplace, easier known as Obamacare. The specific subsidies being debated were not actually a part of the initial healthcare law that passed in 2010. They were created in a 2021 spending bill that was designed to provide financial relief for the COVID-19 pandemic. And they were originally set to expire a year later, and then the Democrats passed another bill called the Inflation Reduction Act that included another 3-year extension. So that brings us to current day. My first question for you, Arielle, is considering that these subsidies were part of an emergency package to provide temporary relief, and the Democrats were the ones that set them to expire in 25. And the reason for that was actually to control cost of the overall bill to gain support. Is it really unreasonable for Republicans to hold them to this and allow them to expire?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, great, concise explanation of how we got here, because I think we just covered the shutdown and Obamacare in like under 3 minutes. So well done. There's a lot going on there. Yes, one, I think you're correct to point out that we're not talking about the OG 2010 Obamacare law. But that being said, there's a lot of federal programs that are iterative and in different years and in different Congresses. They're funded differently. They're being tweaked majorly or slightly depending on who's in charge. They're expanding or contracting. That is all sort of part of normal standard operating procedure in government. And of course, when a lot of the COVID spending bills were passed, which I might add was done jointly by Democrats and by Republicans, right? When the COVID shutdowns first happened, Trump was president. And we were living in a really different world, right? There was a lot that we didn't know. But the enhanced tax credits that were passed, as you said, in 2021, lowered marketplace premiums by an average of 44% for millions of low and middle income Americans by 2024. They also lowered the cost on more comprehensive healthcare plans, so lowering out-of-pocket costs and making care more accessible to more consumers. If they are allowed to expire, John McLaughlin, who's a Republican pollster, estimates that this will effectively be a tax hike on 24 million working-class Americans. So I think if you're viewing this through the lens of just very broad strokes, how insurance is supposed to work, you pool the risk, more people buy in, it should then lower costs, then yes, I think even if COVID was the impetus, and even though we're no longer living in a COVID-burdened world in the same way that we were in 2021, expanding healthcare options and making it more affordable to more Americans is absolutely a good thing and something we should be focused on continuing. I would also note it's been a wild week. It's always a wild week, it seems these days. Marjorie Taylor Greene, someone who I'm not sure I have ever agreed with in my entire life.
Wait, I'm sorry. Are we about to quote her?
She came out earlier this week on social media in support of extending the credits. I was just maybe as surprised as you were. And then she doubled down on this in an interview. She said she realized that if they expire, that her own adult children would see their healthcare premiums double next year. And she's disappointed in her party that they're not finding a solution. And she's not alone among Republicans. I think we're going to see a deepening divide on this issue on the right the longer that this shutdown goes on. And especially with Speaker Johnson sending members back to their districts, because polls are consistently showing support for the ACA and expanding it.
Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit more, the optics of Republicans flying home.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, my turn for you, Debbie. So there's a longstanding joke with people on the left that people hate Obamacare, but then they love the ACA, right? When you explain key policies of the Affordable Care Act, when, a lot of the sort of high-level benefits, stay on your parents' insurance until you're 26, no denial for pre-existing conditions, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, the real crux of the Affordable Care Act was the establishment of these state-led exchanges that allow people to purchase private insurance. And fundamentally, right, this is a free market solution to the problem of uninsured Americans. It's a far cry from Medicare for all. It's not just the government buying everyone insurance. So explain to me why, to you as a fiscal conservative, this is not the answer, and maybe what kind of a solution you'd prefer to see to get more Americans covered.
Well, this is kind of opening Pandora's box. I should put the disclaimer that right after Obamacare passed, I was working for the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and my full-time job for several years was developing messaging against Obamacare. So I found this a little hard to narrow down, if you will. But the number one issue I think we can all agree on is that the healthcare system is so outrageously expensive and it's unaffordable. From my perspective, Obamacare did not actually fix that problem. What it did do is it expanded Medicaid, which historically has been an entitlement program for low-income families with children, pregnant women, sometimes postpartum women, seniors, disabled people. Another thing it did, as you mentioned, and kind of what we're discussing today, is it created the marketplace exchanges where people could go shop and buy insurance. But as we are debating again, this is not simply a marketplace. It is a now heavily subsidized program with 93% of the 24 million Americans enrolled in the exchanges receiving government subsidies. So interestingly enough, the enrollment numbers, once these, I'll call them COVID era subsidies started, they actually doubled. So from 2020 to today, it went from 11 million people on the exchanges to 24 million people. And you might think that's great. All these people are now newly insured. What's concerning to me is you would expect that the number of uninsured Americans would drop by similar amounts, but it didn't. It was far less. It was just a couple million more Americans received health insurance. So what that tells me is people are actually leaving their employer-sponsored healthcare, the healthcare that you get through your employer, for Obamacare, which in my book is a big concern. We should be incentivizing that people get health insurance through their company. And then the third thing that the law did is it created a whole slew of regulations. You just mentioned some of the more popular ones. And were there reforms that were necessary? Absolutely. And those are pretty popular. But there's also some that really made health insurance more expensive. And when the law was being passed, Obama made several promises, but one of those promises was that premiums would drop about $2,500 a year. And what we've seen is the complete opposite. Insurance premiums for people that are buying their health insurance through their employer have actually doubled. And this fact is particularly, I think, relevant to the government shutdown because one of the main arguments we're hearing is that if these subsidies expire, Obamacare premiums are on average going to double. But I think we need to zoom out a little bit and look at the big picture and talk a little bit more specific numbers. Because when I did my research on this, it was very eye-opening. So the median household income in the U.S. today, and bear with me, I'm going to mention a lot of numbers, but I'm going to kind of bring them back together. The median household income in the U.S. today is about $83,000. And the majority of Americans do receive health insurance through their employer. Before the healthcare law passed in 2009, families paid on average about $3,500 a year for their health insurance premiums. That's the part that they paid. Obviously, their employers pay a much bigger chunk of that. Today, the average family pays over $6,000. And that was in 2024. Experts predict it's going to rise significantly this year, upwards of 9%. So, and on top of the premiums increasing, deductibles have also risen dramatically. So on average, deductibles are about $1,800 a year. So when you add it all together, their premiums and their deductibles, we're looking at about $8,000 a year for a family making $83,000. Let's look at now what that means for somebody on Obamacare. So we hear a lot about the fact that these subsidies, people making upwards of 400% of the federal poverty line qualify for these. If you're like me, I had no idea what 400% of the federal poverty line is, but I was looking at it, and at 350%, a family of four is making about $74,000. So I thought that was about the closest we could get to the median income. And they are currently paying $2,500 a year for premiums. If these COVID era subsidies expire, they will be paying $5,600. So even if the Democrats agree to fund the government without the subsidies, even if these expire, someone on Obamacare making about the same amount as the average American family is still paying significantly less for their health insurance. I want to consider two more numbers. Bear with me. This is why people probably tune out and why messaging gets oversimplified, because I know this is boring. The reason why this is concerning to me, this isn't just a matter of fairness. It's really, can our country afford this? The Congressional Budget Office estimated that extending these subsidies are going to cost about $350 billion over a 10-year period. Today, our national debt to GDP ratio, so basically how much we bring in versus how much we spend, is at a record high of 125%. So we are spending more money than we are bringing in. And as we all know, for anyone that's had a mortgage or a car payment or credit card, this is not free. There is interest, and that interest alone is $1 trillion a year. That's more than the entire defense budget. And to pay for the interest, the U.S. Treasury has to sell government securities. And all of this leads to further inflation, dollar devaluation, and just overall straining on confidence, which hurts every single American. So this is a very long-winded way for me to say that the shutdown is not, to me, simply about should some people get help and other people's don't. It really is a broader question of, can we afford it? And if we're trying to help these hardworking Americans, are we actually really hurting them with all the additional debt that we're incurring?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think that probably anyone who isn't concerned about deficit spending probably should be. I think, one, this tells me healthcare is ripe for a longer conversation in another episode.
For sure.
And two, I think that people like me would probably say, well, did we really just need to appropriate an additional $75 billion to spend on ICE? Which, again, is probably another topic for another specific episode on what we're seeing in cities across America.
Yeah. Well, I think we will agree on this. This is the problem with not passing appropriation bills. We shouldn't be in a world where we're debating whether or not we should fund healthcare or shut down the government and pay our employees. I mean, there is a reason why we consider each of these as standalone packages in a normal Congress, but it hasn't been normal for a long time. And that just speaks to the dysfunction of Washington.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so I guess this kind of, maybe you just answer a little bit more, but I want to give you a chance to expand upon it a little bit. So if you turn on the news, all you're going to hear is Republicans saying that it's Democrats' fault. They're holding the government hostage with Obamacare. You're going to turn on MSNBC and you're going to hear that, Republicans are putting themselves before the American people. There's no shortage of pointing fingers at who's to blame. And if you want to hop on that hamster wheel, you are more than welcome to turn on the news. We are not interested in that. So I don't want this question to come across as another effort to play the blame game. But I do think it is worth asking, do you think it is worth the cost? Right now, if we do not come to an agreement next week, 750,000, I've seen numbers vary, but a lot of government workers are not going to receive their next paycheck. You and I worked on the Hill. We know that some of these people are making $30,000. They can't afford to miss one paycheck. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on whether, I know you agree with the subsidies, but is it worth shutting down the government over this?
Yeah. And I do think it's kind of insult to injury for the president to say that he's not going to then issue that back pay when eventually the shutdown does end. But I think at baseline, that's a totally fair question. I do think that when we're seeing such chaotic and confusing and just oftentimes that kind of scorched earth approach out of this White House when it comes to administering the federal government, I think the shutdown just kind of feels like another day to a lot of people, beginning with Elon Musk and the Doge efforts, which just kind of trickled off. We don't really hear about that anymore. We don't really know what's going on there. USAID being dismantled, the Department of Education being unraveled, confusion at NIH. This is all unfair to government workers as far as I'm concerned. So I think with this chaos and confusion that we've seen since this administration took office, it doesn't to me feel like this is any different. I have a really dear friend who's an NIH scientist. And again, this is the perspective of one person who's also fortunate enough to be in a 2-income household. But she told me, this is actually the least stress that she's been in a very long time to be furloughed right now, because the stress of, am I going to lose my job? I'm supposed to share 5 things now every week that I accomplished, and who is reading this and what standard are they holding me to? Am I going to have a job next week? Is my department going to be dismantled? Is there going to be a shutdown? Is there not? In some ways, she feels kind of calmer and more at peace than she has in a long time, which maybe is sort of a sad and, nihilistic kind of take on where we are right now. But I think it's just been nothing but chaos and confusion, unfortunately, for federal workers since January.
Yeah, that's a very fair point.
Okay, so while we're talking about messaging, the talking point that has really kind of gotten under my skin in this debate has been this mistaken notion that undocumented immigrants are somehow getting health care coverage through these subsidies, which is a lie. What it does provide, and I want to be clear that, part of the spending that we've been talking about and the subsidies that we've been talking about, what they do provide are emergency Medicaid to hospitals, mainly to hospital ERs, to provide care to people who are uninsured. And that could be uninsured American citizens. It could, yes, be undocumented immigrants. It could be people who are just here on vacation. But the reality is that our emergency rooms are so constrained, are so overburdened, and are constantly losing money because of how many Americans are uninsured and unable to get proper access to primary and regular care. So I personally wouldn't want to live in a world where you wind up wheeled into an ER and you have to show proof of citizenship after, God forbid, a car accident or this, suspected heart attack or something. And in my mind, that's just sort of, this is like the price that we have to pay until we figure out our broken immigration system, which of course is long overdue, and while we work to get more citizens insured. But I want to hear from you, Debbie, about why you think this sort of illegal immigration talking point has become part of the discussion. Stretch to me. Do you think that this kind of fear mongering is fair game?
Yeah. So I think this kind of goes into obviously messaging, which is fortunately an area that we are better equipped to discuss than healthcare policy or the economy. The Democrats, from my perspective, have been very disciplined and aligned in their messaging, which being aligned on messaging is obviously the most effective way to navigate a crisis. I think it is a lot easier to communicate a positive policy goal, such as giving Americans significantly reduced healthcare. I think anytime you're on your heels and you're the party in power and you're responsible for moving legislation forward, members are going to be disjointed. They're going to be all over the place. And so I think what you see is people struggling to get something that's really going to pull at the heartstrings, because the Democrats have done a really good job of humanizing this. And what you're seeing is that the Republicans are really struggling to meet that emotional, pithy soundbite. And so they're just fighting the Democrats' talking points and resorting to low blows regardless of the accuracy. When
Absolutely.
I used to use this quote all the time and try and use it against Democrats, but it always stuck with me. Rahm Emanuel once famously said, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." Is this really about the healthcare subsidies, or are Democrats just excited to have an opportunity to position themselves well for the midterms? I was wondering, let's say the Democrats are in the minority still in the Senate, but they have a Democratic president who could be blamed for the shutdown. Do you think they'd be holding out on these subsidies?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think putting myself in kind of like the Rom warrior mindset, 2 things can be true at the same time, right? You alluded to this before. I think with Republicans controlling all 3 branches of government in normal times, it would be difficult for them to escape the blame of this shutdown. But as we've seen, we are not living in normal times. And I do think that the Democrats' line of thinking is, if these premiums go up, voters will blame the party in power. And that's what they'll be thinking about when they pull the lever next November, right?
For sure.
If these premiums double, right, and people start getting notification of this, and that's sort of starts in this new year period, that's what's going to be on people's minds next fall. I also think that it is absolutely true that the more activist wing of the Democratic Party is very buoyed and reassured to see Democrats holding the line on this one and taking a stand. And I think it does help that there is some sort of follow-on logic to the way that this argument has evolved since March, right? Which is sort of the storytelling on it is we gave this administration a chance, but they have been acting as though we are already in a shutdown by pretty much doing whatever they want anyway. And so we can't trust them to be acting in good faith at this point. But ultimately, I think, as you said, a lot of this has to do with kind of reading the tea leaves for the midterms. And it could be the case that, the Republican leadership is reading them wrong. Again, John McLaughlin wrote about this in Town Hall, which is, of course, very much not a liberal source. And he's one of President Trump's own pollsters. He believes, based on his polling, that 4 out of 5 voters overwhelmingly support preserving the tax credits. And that includes 76% of Republicans and 73% of Trump voters. So as far as whether this is sort of like, a power play or like a really great strategic move on the chessboard for the midterms next fall, I think only time will tell.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there.
So I think that's actually the perfect segue into some messaging critique, which we've been talking about doing, kind of a fun one. So Debbie, what's the one thing you think that the Democrats and the Republicans are each doing right and wrong when it comes to messaging on the shutdown?
Yeah, I spoke to it a little bit, but the Democrats are doing a really great job being consistent, and their issue and their storytelling is very compelling. In general, that's where Democrats excel. I think it is easy to distill your point and your message when you bring in that human aspect, and Democrats do a great job of that. The Republicans, on the other hand, in my book, are failing. For starters, they're throwing spaghetti at the wall trying to see what message will work. And I'm paying attention, and I've had a hard time kind of tracking what their main message is. I think one of the consequences, if you will, when you try on every shoe is you're going to trip over them. And they certainly are. On one channel, you're hearing Republicans criticize Democrats for playing politics with the economy and people's livelihoods. But then on the other channel, you're hearing them talk about how people don't deserve their back pay and how they want to cut more jobs. And so their concern for individuals impacted by the shutdown is hardly believable if you're also talking about how you can fire people and withhold pay. Leaving town is just a horrible look. And I hate to keep those members there when they are living apart from their families, but you're not going to come to any agreement if you're not speaking. I think that is one of the biggest mistakes, or the biggest mistake they're making. But I will say, being in the minority, you always have a messaging advantage. And I think we saw this when Republicans were in the minority. It's really easy to put together a plan that works when you don't have to make it work, if that makes sense.
100%.
Republicans repeatedly voted to repeal Obamacare, and then when they were in power, they were scrambling to figure out how to actually reform the system. And so being the party of no, which the Democrats are in right now, is always easier. I'll give them that. But I think historically, Democrats are really good storytellers.
Yeah, well, I think, sometimes we can maybe see a little bit more clear-eyed when we're on the outside. So I will say, I think that the Republicans, I'll give them an A+ for alliteration on the Schumer shutdown. Like, that sounds great, It's very pithy. I will give them that. I have been watching some Fox News lately, as much as it kind of it does start to hurt my soul. But
Marjorie Taylor Greene,
it's hard.
Town Hall,
I know.
Fox News.
What is happening?
I'm really getting to you, aren't I? I'm not even reading these sources.
What have
Maybe
you done
this
to
is
me?
The problem. Maybe this is where you.
Maybe this is a problem. It's so true. It's so true. But hearing on Fox News that this is all about Senator Schumer avoiding a challenge from the left and being scared of being primaried by AOC, I think the average voter cares 0% about internal party battles. So to me, that really reinforces what you're saying, Debbie, that they are just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, because that is not strong messaging, in my opinion.
But what it is doing is bolstering his liberal credentials. I mean, I've talked to other friends, liberal friends, and they're like, great, he's finally standing up, And so
totally.
What Republicans are trying to do is dig him, but it's actually helping him within his own party.
It is. And I mean, if you think about it, when he sort of did the about face, and there were a lot of people who were upset with him last March on the CR, which I think, when he explained the rationale, it made sense that we didn't want to give the president carte blanche to do whatever he wanted. And then, of course, he was doing it anyway. But it did make sense. I think if you were sort of following the reasoning, I think the sort of turning on a dime was what pissed a lot of people off. But, I think that the real problem there was when President Trump came out and thanked him, right? He tweeted, like, "Thank you, Senator Schumer." And I was like, boy, this is not going to go over well. He knew what he was doing. He knows what he's doing every time. And that being President Trump, he knows what he's doing with those tweets. And Senator Schumer already had egg on his face, I think. And that was really just like the final blow, to totally mix metaphors. On the Dems, I think, again, we're in agreement on this, that they're absolutely right to home in on healthcare coverage. I would like to see who and how we are taking this argument to the other side. A lot of the poll numbers are showing that there's a lot of Republicans, a lot of Trump voters who kind of agree with us here. Apparently, Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of them. And I'm just not like,
Do you want her?
when I'm
Do you
watching
wanna have her
Fox
in your
News.
party?
No, thank you. Unless she can procure me a laser beam or whatever, like a space laser. But as I said, I have been watching Fox News, and I'm not seeing our best communicators there making this case. We need them there like yesterday. I would love to see, I think we have some great governor communicators right now. And I would love to see Gretchen Whitmer. I would love to see Josh Shapiro. I would love to see Wes Moore out there talking about this shutdown and what it means for their voters and our citizens. And I'm just not seeing that right now. So I would like to see some of our really top people who can communicate well in a way that people can understand, taking that message out there, because as I think we both said, it's working.
Well, Arielle, that's what you're here for, right? To communicate to our several thousand listeners. I remember texting you when Schumer voted with the Republicans last time, and I was like, wow, I really respect him doing what's best for our country and joining the other side. So I know it upset the base, but I do think at the end of the day, when people cross over and compromise, the average American, because they're so exhausted from these food fights, is relieved. And at the end of the day, I think they are appreciated. So I wouldn't look past that. Beyond the outcome of the shutdown, what do you think the political outcome of all this is going to be? Or we've talked a little bit about parties blaming each other and what the American people think. I mean, what do you think is going to be the fallout from all of this?
Well, I think at this point, we've sort of seen this movie before, right? We've seen more and more shutdowns with greater frequency since the sort of famous Clinton mid-90s shutdown. And then I think the most recent one under Trump was the longest one, ever, right? There was another one under Obama over ACA implementation. So, I think that for better or worse, people just sort of see this as part of normal government function, which is very sad, but just the reality that we're in. I read somewhere, I think it was an economist stating that this shutdown doesn't really have a big effect on the economy writ large and doesn't really sort of affect the average American worker. Obviously, tremendous effect on the government workers who are going without pay. I don't want to ignore that because I think it's very important. And I think it's extremely important as we start seeing more and more delays and we approach the busy travel season. Like, if there's just messy Thanksgiving travel at the airport, if we're still in this shutdown, then just God help us all, because that's going to be really frustrating for a lot of people, not to mention the TSA agents who will have been there without pay for, at that point, 6 weeks or more. So
it's criminal, really. It makes me
it
sick
is.
to
It's
think
really
about.
unfair, especially for people who are trying to keep us all safe. It's really terrible. So I don't know about political outcome. It's hard to have a crystal ball on that one, but it does feel at this point like people just kind of shrug it off and they're like, well, that's just the kind of messed up system that we live in.
Yeah, the desensitization to it is actually really sad. I don't know where you were in 2013. I remember thinking, we thought it was the end of the world. We were in 5th grade when the last one happened. So we didn't ever know this was a possibility. I was panicking. It's a sad day that now we're like, oh, it's just another shutdown. Congress already last month had a horrible approval rating of 37%. This month it's dropped down to 32%. And so I don't think the fallout is going to necessarily be against Democrats or Republicans, but we're just seeing really
Agreed.
the collapse of one of our branches of government. That's scary and that's crazy. And I just think about what other nations are thinking about us on the international scale. We're trying to negotiate peace talks in Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Hamas, and we can't even agree on how to spend our money. This is what happens when you elect fighters. If you think about every
Mm.
political campaign, people are saying, I'm fighting for conservative values. I'm fighting for the middle class. Like, we don't need a bunch of fighters. What we need are statesmen. Your job, literally, is to come to agreement with people. You know, when you're elected to Congress, that you're going to be working with half the body that doesn't agree with you for half the country that doesn't agree with you. And you're supposed to be a deal maker. That's what President Trump, prides himself on.
Right.
But I think this is all about winning elections, which I don't understand the point of winning an election if you aren't going to do something positive with it. But when you are focused so much on the next midterms or the next presidential, all you're worried about is who's going to get credit, which party is going to be blamed, and people are terrified. I mean, like we saw with Schumer, he got that backlash whenever he did compromise and put the country first, really. So it's concerning to me.
It is. It's such a salient point, and I know that in the past with elected officials that I've worked for, people love to play the game of, oh, like, what are they going to run for next and what are they going to do? And we live in this world where there's just, it's, what's next and more power and more prestige. And it's unfortunate in a lot of ways because, as I love to remind people, being a legislator, whether you're in the state house or whether you're in Congress, is a very different skill set from being an executive, right? From being a
Exactly.
governor, from being president, very different skill.
For
And
sure.
I think that we're seeing too many people who are just like, what is the next opportunity for
Mhm.
me?
Mhm.
And not really thinking about how do I use my skills and my talents, whatever they may be. Maybe it's, I'm really good with budgets. I'm a really good chief executive. Or maybe it's, I'm really good at compromise and I'm really good at finding middle ground. But we need to be thinking more. And I think people who are running for office, as you said, need to be thinking more about being good representatives. And part of that means being able to talk to the other side and being able
For
to come to compromise and being able to negotiate, because we're just not seeing that out of DC right now.
For sure. And that requires being in DC to actually compromise.
Yes, it does.
When you are spending all of your time criticizing your opponent in the media, who's going to want to work with you? Then it becomes digging your heels in against the person that's attacked you. This is kind of a side story, but I remember I volunteered one year at the National Prayer Breakfast, and admittedly, it was because George Bush was going to be there and I wanted to sneak a glimpse and hopefully get assigned to the door that he walked through. But they had a meeting beforehand and they were kind of sharing stories about how the senators have their different prayer meetings. And this story stuck with me. It was so powerful. I forget who exactly was telling it, but someone was saying that they go to the weekly Senate prayer meetings and Hillary Clinton would be there. And he said, it is really hard to stand on the Senate floor and talk negatively about somebody that you just sat in a meeting and prayed with. And I thought that was
100%.
so powerful. And I don't know where those meetings are today, but if I had to venture to guess, they may not be meeting anymore because it sure doesn't
I think
seem
you're
like
probably
it.
right.
Yeah.
But it's true. Like, how uncomfortable is that, right? You're like sitting next to someone praying, thinking about your spirituality and your faith, and bashing them on the floor.
Yeah.
The next minute. Anyway, well, Debbie, last week's lightning round, I hear, was very popular. And so I heard from a lot of people that they really enjoyed it. So I have some questions for you.
Okay. I'm very nervous.
Oh, you shouldn't be nervous. They're not that hard. I
Okay.
promise. Okay. What is a food you could eat every day?
Queso. And I do
Yes.
eat it every day.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm
I'm
really
right there with you.
excited because being in Alabama, they call it cheese dip here. And it's because it basically is cheese dip. It's just like a melted block of cheese, which I love cheese. So it's just as delicious. But my favorite taco place in Texas, Taco Deli, Whole Foods now sells their line of queso. And it's dangerous because I have just been eating it like for
Oh,
dinner.
man.
Back to my old college ways. So very long answer, but I feel very passionate about queso.
A Southern friend introduced me to pimento cheese dip, and I'm like,
Oh,
this is
yeah,
the
that's
greatest
good.
thing ever.
It
It's
is
so
good, yeah.
good. I'm new to this, but I think the Trader Joe's version is pretty good. And she's like, no,
Yeah.
it is legitimately very good. So,
Oh, good.
yeah,
I haven't tried
it's
that. I'm going to
delicious.
pick that up today.
Yeah, it's really good. Okay, what's a color that you hate and why?
I don't know. I don't know if I hate a color. That's such an interesting question. I'm like looking around now. What colors? I mean,
Is
what
there a
first
color
popped
that you
into
don't wear? Yeah, what first popped into your head? Let's start there.
I'm not good with red. It doesn't work with my skin tone, which is unfortunate. Like
It actually
being a
doesn't for me either.
being a
Well, it's worse
Republican,
for
I
you.
went to school with red. Our hometown's now red. There's a lot of red. So
Yeah.
red, yeah, I don't like the color red. Thank you.
Okay. There you go. Going against the grain. I like it. Okay, what's one thing that you won't let your kids do or have that they bug you about?
A phone or a watch.
I mean, it starts so young, right?
Yeah. They're gonna be like 18 before they get a smartphone when they can buy it themselves, I
Same.
think.
Girl, same. Also, it's really, it's great to know that another thing we have in common is neither of us has trouble saying no to our children just
Oh,
all
yeah.
the time.
For sure. For sure. I
Like,
am
no,
told
it's
on a
not
daily
happening. No.
basis I am the worst mom ever.
Yeah. Um, okay. Name one good thing that President Obama did.
Oh, this isn't really policy related, but what I love about the Obamas is their marriage and their family. I especially love in Michelle's book just the bit on some of the struggles that they had navigating being two working parents, her struggle whenever he was president and she had to step down from her career and some of that resentment. I really love their vulnerability and it was very encouraging as obviously we have faced that in our marriage, just being two working parents.
Yeah, I loved her book too. Felt very authentic. It was a really great read. And I loved her relationship with her mom and that she moved into the White House with them.
Yeah.
I thought that was
Sweet
really
gig.
great. Sweet gig, right? Okay, so this is kind of a funny one, but between you and your husband, who decides that the tube of toothpaste is finished and throws it out and then hopefully also replaces it?
Girl, we don't
Or
share a
not?
tube. No way. Gross.
You have your own toothpaste?
Yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh.
the best thing for our marriage has been we don't just have like dual sinks side by side. They don't touch. And
Yeah.
so we have to have our own of everything.
There you go.
Yeah. So no, I would never.
All right. So it's 100% your responsibility. That's kind of better that way.
Yeah. It's also my responsibility to buy his as well. I guess I should note that.
Well, yeah. I was going to say, I feel like I'm constantly replacing it because my husband would be like, I don't know where it is. Let me replace that for you. Do you use
Yeah.
the same kind of toothpaste or do you use different toothpaste?
He just uses whatever I buy. Yeah. I
Yeah,
have
whatever you
sensitive
buy.
Teeth.
Fair.
Mhm.
I do the Sensodyne too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very intimate, about my
Very
dental
intimate.
habits.
Are you flossing? I hope you're flossing, Debbie.
Gosh,
Okay.
you and my dentist.
What's your desert island album?
That's a good one. I'm gonna have to say Brooks and Dunn. Brooks and Dunn radio. I can
Love.
listen to that on repeat. Yeah.
Okay, and last question. This, mind you, sounds like it kind of has to be political, but it totally doesn't have to be political. If you were forced to have a bumper sticker on your car, what would it say?
I'm not that irritable of a driver, so I don't know if it'd be a message to them. Gosh, the only bumper sticker I have is my college logo, so that's my answer. I'm sorry, that's
There
really
you go.
boring.
That's your answer.
It's so boring, though. I feel like I
It's
should.
not boring.
I should.
If
Oh,
you
you
had
know
to
what?
pick-
It would probably be like a Housewives quote, to be
Yeah.
honest. Yeah.
Take a Xanax.
It's so cringe. This is so embarrassing. I totally fell for all those keep calm and carry on. So, I had that above my desk, but I
Oh, yeah.
also had a sign above my desk that I won't apologize for that says, a failure to plan on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. Because, these policy staffers would come up and be like, oh, we're
Yes.
going to do this, put together a press release now. And I'd be like, sorry, you didn't tell me in time. So I'm a total Karen.
Yeah.
So I'm sure my bumper sticker would be something like that.
When I remember my desk in DC, I had this letter taped up from when I worked for the Senate Judiciary Committee. I think every member had probably received a letter from the Parents Television Council, and they were like, we went through and we watched 17,000 hours of TV and we found all of these words that were only partially bleeped or not bleeped at all. And then it was a list of all the most vile words you could possibly think of, typed out. And I just thought this was the funniest thing in the world.
I've never heard of this.
You can't say this on TV, but we're going to write them all out for you. And so I had it taped to my wall, and whenever I had a bad day, I would look at it and laugh. It was very funny.
That is so funny. I love that so much. I'll have to consider that if I ever have an office again.
There you go.
We really loved getting feedback from everybody. We were totally blown away. We are pleased to say we did have more than 7 listeners. I think the real test will be whether people listen again,
You can prove that you're a true fan or a true friend. You can just be a friend. You don't have to be a fan at this point by liking or subscribing on YouTube, leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and be in touch. We'd love to hear. What did you like? What did you not like? What do you want to hear more of? We're waiting to hear from you.
Yes. And hopefully next week it's not about the government shutdown. Thoughts and
Let's hope
prayers.
we're past that.
All right. We'll catch you next week.
Take care.
And yeah, I'm being nice because I'm on speakerphone, but if I wasn't on speakerphone, I'd be being, should we say, somewhat less agreeable? Yeah?